Good evening, everyone, and happy St. Patty's Day to y'all. Is that a mix of Irish and Texan? I don't know. But it's St. Patrick's Day, and it doesn't matter if you're from Texas or Boston or Kansas. Everyone's a little bit Irish today, aren't they? So happy St. Patty's Day to you all. St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, the patron saint of a lot of the United States, it seems like. Why not miss the opportunity to drink green beer, dye Chicago River Green? I was in Chicago for seminary and like to go see him die in the river, which I guess they still did this year, even though, well, there's not spectators allowed. Why dye a river green if you can't have spectators? I don't know. But nonetheless, if you're flying in Chicago today, you could see the green Chicago River. Boston, great place for celebrating there. New York, St. Patrick's Cathedral. I am at the epicenter of St. Patrick's in Kansas because I am at St. Patrick Catholic Church here in the Archdiocese of Kansas City in Kansas. That means it's a solemnity here for us today. So those not liturgical nerds, there are actually three levels of feast day in our calendar in the Catholic Church today. We have memorials, which is the lowest, and then a feast, which is the middle, and then the highest form of celebration is a solemnity. Well, we have what is known as a proper solemnity today, meaning it's the feast of our patron saint of our parish, so we get a solemnity. It means we got to wear white today at Mass, and there's no fasting today. It's a day of celebration for us here at St. Patrick Parish because it's our feast day. So one thing we Catholics certainly know how to do is feast, and I think that's why a lot of non-Catholic people like St. Patrick's Day because, well, everyone seems to want to join in on feasting, so why not drink some green Guinness on... I don't know if you can't even really do green Guinness, can you? I don't know, that would be ugly. Drink some green beer, drink a Guinness on St. Patrick's Day. Wear your green, not orange. We'll talk about that. Yeah, so it's just a great day that it's one of those things where, sure, everyone can be like, well, you don't really know the real St. Patrick, and this isn't about green beer and leprechauns and gold at the end of rainbows and things like that. Okay, fair enough. There is a lot of lore or legend or things out there about St. Patrick that, of course, who knows? Even if you really, really study St. Patrick and really try to get down who he was, there's not a whole lot. He was probably born at the end of the 4th century, around maybe 385, somewhere around there. We know that he goes back to Ireland in about 341, which we'll talk about. It probably dies about 461, around there. Goes to Ireland at 431 and dies about 461 on traditionally the 17th of March. So in case you wondered, why do we celebrate St. Patrick's Day the 17th of March? This is the day that we believe St. Patrick died in Ireland after a long career of evangelizing and spreading the faith to the Emerald Isle. Now, that's a bit of what people know. He was this Irish guy. He spread the faith to Ireland. What more do you need to know? Well, we're gonna learn a little bit more about St. Patrick tonight, but not just St. Patrick. I found out that when I was trying to, study a little bit, I realized I don't know much about Ireland. The good news is there's not a whole lot to know about St. Patrick. Actually, we have what is believed to be one of his writings that tells a little bit about his life, but we actually don't know a whole lot about St. Patrick. We know a little bit more about Irish history and the effect that St. Patrick had, so we'll certainly look at that. But there's just so much history of Ireland that I realized I don't know a whole lot. Now, my mom would be quick to remind me on this day, don't forget to wear your green. So... I was, happy to oblige my mom, and so there for the wearing of the green is my green mask that I wore around all day. I know it's kind of a subtle green compared to what other people are wearing, but there's my green mask. Other than that, I'm wearing black. We'll talk a little bit about green. I wanted to start, though, talking a little bit about just the role that Irish history has played in this country. Why so much about St. Patrick? Well, my mom would, of course, remind me, and my grandpa would remind me, they are Kennedys. Our family comes from Ireland. So I always kind of thought half Irish, something like that. I did that little ancestry DNA thing, and the percentage seems like I got more of my dad's genes from the Netherlands and Germany. But I'm going to say half Irish because my mom's a Kennedy. That makes me half Irish. There's a lot of German and Dutch and stuff in there, but, doesn't everyone want to be Irish on St. Patrick's Day? And my name is Shawn. I will say that the other day, I've been at St. Patrick Parish here now for almost 2 years, and we had school mass the other day, and the kids they'll pray for the priest, and it kind of took me by surprise a little bit because they were praying for Pope Francis and Archbishop Naumann, and then they prayed. We got 3 priests here: Father Mark, Father Shawn, and Father Michael, and they prayed for our priest, Father Mark, Father Scene, and Father Michael. Okay. I mean, just in case I would get all puffed up thinking that I'm somebody, I've been here 2 years, and the person who wrote that petition didn't know how to spell my name and did it the Irish Gaelic version, S-E-A-N. I'm an S-H-A-W-N, in case you haven't noticed. And here's a person reading that petition, and I'm right behind them, and they don't realize I'm Father Shawn. Anyway, a little bit about name. So Shawn is, in fact, S-H-A-W-N is kind of an English version of the Gaelic-looking S-E-A-N. You might recognize Shawn, John, J-E-A-N, Jean. So my name is Irish, Gaelic. We'll talk a little bit about that. What's Gaelic? So I'm happy of my Irish heritage on this day. My great-great-great-grandfather, Lawrence Kennedy, came to the United States from Dublin via New York in 1854. Arrived October 16th, 1854 in the port of New York. So this is... There was a big Irish potato famine at kind of the end of the 1840s, ended by 1848, around there. So this is after the famine. There's a lot of political history that we'll get into tonight, but actually my great-great-great-grandfather was not a poor person who left in a potato famine. He was actually a fairly well-to-do gentleman who, he was Catholic and was writing a lot for Irish independence and against some of the oppressive Catholic laws that were oppressing the Catholics by the rule of the British Protestants at the time. And so he actually feared for his safety. And he came to Kansas to start a new life as a farmer, and he didn't know the first thing about farming. So he actually hired people to farm for him when he got to Kansas. I've been able to trace my genealogy back to Ireland, and so I have 2 documents that I'm able to point to from my own history. I've got the church records from the parish church where my great-great-great-grandparents were married. So I have the entry handwritten by the priest on the day that they were married in 1850. And then in 1851, I've got the baptismal record of their first daughter. So Lawrence and Eliza and little Margaret, or Maggie as she would go to be known later. So that's kind of neat. There's not a whole lot of Irish records before that, so that might be about as far as I can get it in Ireland. But anyway, I assume that a lot of you watching tonight probably have some kind of Irish background. Or not. If not, you want to have some Irish background today. So anyway, that's a little bit about my history. All right, so we're going to talk about St. Patrick, but to do that, we kind of got to start with what was there before St. Patrick? Patrick lived at the end of the 4th century. As I said, had his mission from about 431 to 461. So what about before that? Well, and again, I've been reading lots of books. I've been reading, there's this one, which I highly recommend, Rebels, The Irish Uprising of 1916 by Peter DeRosa. Check that one out. That's nonfiction. Then this is a fiction one, A Man Cleansed by God. This is it's kind of a, what is it? It's, I don't know. It's a fictional work, but it uses the actual first-hand documents that we have that Patrick wrote, called his Confession. He wrote about his life, and so this kind of dramatizes what it would be like, and in case you're looking for something else, Irish Histories for Dummies. What are you gonna do? Actually, the for Dummies stuff is actually some pretty good stuff. So if you want like a 1-volume little thing, Irish History for Dummies. I go on that. And then something just a little more artistic, Celtic Praise. This is just a bunch of different kind of poems and prayers and stuff written in a Celtic sort of spirit. So some of the books I'm reading, and YouTube, tons of videos, Wikipedia. I mean, don't trust everything you read on Wikipedia, but hey, there's a lot you can get on there. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Druids. Who doesn't love a good Druid story? So before the Christians get there, before Patrick gets there, what is Ireland like? Well, we'll leave out the somewhat prehistoric kind of Iron Age, Bronze Age, but Druids. You've probably heard the word Druid. This is kind of a natural kind of religion. So Druids refer to people who would consider that God somehow is revealed, and his will can be known through oftentimes nature. So, for instance, if someone was going to invade some other place, they might go to the local druid and say, is it favorable for me to fight this battle? Or, should I get married? Or things like that. And the druid might consult, the wind, the trees, water, rocks, whatever. So some kind of a naturalistic kind of religion. But nonetheless, before we kind of poo-poo that, they're worshiping rocks and trees and things, this isn't California or something here. It is the beginnings, anyway, that they can say that they're open to some kind of a supernatural. And so that would certainly, as we see with our own native peoples here in America, there is put in the heart of everyone, even people who don't know Jesus, don't know God, haven't experienced this revelation. There is something innate, meaning from our birth, born into us, to desire the supernatural, to desire God. And Druids were what were going on in Ireland before Christianity and Patrick gets there. So Druids are kind of, you call them kind of like the priests of their naturalistic religion at the time. So we have Druids, and then we have these group of people that start to come up from mainland Europe, come up through what would be Great Britain, England, Wales there, and they are known as the Celts. Celts. So, that's my little book on Celtic praise. The Celts. They are, they're not one group. They're like 4 different groups. The most impressive of the 4 groups of Celts who come up through Britain and Ireland are known as the Gaels, from which we get the word Gaelic today. And so the interesting thing about them is that unlike all of the rest of Europe, you think about what's going on in Europe, say 200 years BC and up to 400 after. What's going on in Europe? The Roman Empire. Okay, we know this from our Bible and things. Well, people don't often realize that the Roman Empire stretched all the way up to England, Great Britain, Britannia as it was then. That's a long way to think. What is Rome doing up all the way up there? Well, that's part of the problem. They couldn't hold on to all that, so eventually they pulled back. But one of the big parts of history was the Roman Empire. They decided not to invade Ireland, and it says that the general got to the far west coast of Britain, looked across, saw Ireland, and just decided they'd had enough. We're a long way from Rome up here. It's cold. We don't like England very much. It's cold and wet and dark. And if you're telling me Ireland is the same, we don't want to have anything to do with it. And actually, legend is that one of the great kind of early propaganda was that the people in Ireland actually tried to pass on to the Romans that Ireland is terrible, cold, ugly, ice, dark, don't bother. And they didn't. So the neat thing about that is then the language, the Gaelic, as we would know it today, from the Gaels, from the Celts who came in, remained largely unpolluted by the Latin that would have been working its way up from the rest of the continent. And as we'll see throughout Irish history, Ireland kind of remained a thing unto itself. They managed not to be Romanized by everything like the rest of the world was, and so this independent kind of streak that Ireland has always had served it well in maintaining its identity, and as we'll see, it is particularly important as us as Catholics maintaining their Catholic identity, because the peoples of Ireland politically have been, in a kind of tug of war with Britain and England for, well, almost since the time of St. Patrick. And they've maintained, at least until recent times, their Catholic faith. So that kind of independent streak, the political things can come and go, but the faith stays. And we hope that'll be true, and whether even the beginnings here of the 21st century, that Ireland will continue to maintain faith, although we're struggling a bit now. Okay, so we've got these Gaels, we've got the Celts that are coming up. All right, then what happens is that Rome pulls out of Britain. They decided, we've had it. We got other battles to fight. We're going back, and so they leave Britain. And what this does is it leaves Britain pretty much undefended. And so now the kind of kings from Ireland can start raiding. There's not necessarily a central kind of government in Ireland at this time. People might know today there are 32 counties in Ireland, like 4 provinces and 32 counties. Those little counties do go back quite a ways, but it kind of, each of those little areas was like governed by a chief or a king. There might have been as many as like 200 or maybe even 300 kings scattered around Ireland. Eventually, they would all be consolidated down to people who would vie for the title of High King and be kind of king of all Ireland. Well, it's at this time that the Romans withdraw from Britain, leaving Britain undefended, that some of these kings, chieftains, start saying, hey, I want some slaves for my kingdom back in Ireland. And so they start raiding across the Irish Sea, back over to England, and snatching up people and bringing them back to Ireland to enslave them. A lot of people might have heard that, maybe in a joke or something, that, oh, St. Patrick, he wasn't even Irish. Well, this is actually true. St. Patrick was a Roman citizen of Britain. He was not Irish at all. And when he was 16 years old, he was taken as a slave to Ireland. St. Patrick first comes to Ireland as a slave. And that's amazing. And sometimes, I guess I've read that in his biography before, and I thought, okay, St. Patrick, he's a slave, whatever, and then he goes back. He was a slave for 6 years in Ireland, or at the manor of some local chieftain who enslaved him and put him to work. And of all things, he eventually became a shepherd. Imagine that. This future bishop who would shepherd all of Ireland was an actual shepherd. He learned how to care for sheep as a slave. Well, he was always, very headstrong. They say that from his own confession, and when I say his confession, I am like, people may be familiar with the Confessions of Augustine, which he wrote. It's kind of a story of his life, so to speak. It gets called a confession, so that it can kind of, this is written in a way to say, like, here's an account of my life. So Patrick writes his confession, and so a lot of what I say about him, we know because it comes from him. He wrote it, and he told us. And so he says plainly, he was not a good Christian when he was living in Britain. He didn't care much for the faith. I mean, yeah, he's baptized, but who cares? How many teenagers do we know like that? He was a 16-year-old teenager. He didn't care about his Christian faith. And so he gets taken as a slave. And depending on what you believe, he meets a priest or other religious people. And while he's a slave, he really starts to learn about God. He gets some instruction. And you might imagine that when you've got nothing, you have some time to pray. And Patrick tells us that he began to pray. He became, as a slave, a real man of prayer. So much so that, famously, he had visions, or at least audible experiences, where he heard the voice of God telling him what he wanted him to do. And as it came time, he was really trying to escape a lot at the beginning, but then he just had to rest and say that God has willed this. And it's a real kind of change in Patrick that takes place during those 6 years of slavery. He went from being kind of a headstrong son of privilege. His father was probably some kind of a Roman sort of official in the town where he was from. He felt kind of entitled, sort of full of himself, you can imagine. Well, slavery changes that, and Patrick instead becomes humble. He becomes dependent upon God. He starts to accept the will of God, to say, if God allowed me to be a slave, God must know what he's doing. And eventually he starts to trust that somehow this will work out. And he finally hears the voice of God telling him that his ship is ready. Like a ship. Now, we probably think that Patrick is on the east coast of Ireland. But the ship that is referred to, he escapes, and he walks 200 miles, probably all across Ireland, to the western side, where he does, in fact, find a ship that is going not back to England, but it is going to mainland Europe, to France. And so Patrick, after 6 years of slavery, finally escapes, and he and a friend who dies on the way, and he escapes in a little boat, and he goes to France. And his plan is to cross France and get to Rome, because he thinks that's where his parents will be, because they assume that his parents have left and have gone back to Rome when the Romans left Britain. So he goes all across France. Says that he was in the wilderness 28 days. And guess what? He almost gets to Rome, and he gets captured again. Imagine that. You get enslaved again. Like, I just got my freedom, and now I'm enslaved again. So it is. But this time, Patrick is willing to say, okay. The voice comes to him and says, you will be with them for 2 months. It's like, okay, this time Patrick has learned his lesson. He'll trust. And literally on the 60th day, he was delivered from that captivity, and he continued on to Rome, where he is then he meets actually with the Pope, and he goes back to Britain. Now a free person, finds his parents. They're actually back there, and it's at that time that he meets up with the priest, and he's really struggling. He's become a great man of faith, and he thinks he wants to maybe be a priest, but he's not sure. And eventually he decides, okay, he'll give it a try. And so he goes back to France and studies with Germanus, the great bishop of there, and 15 more years probably of studying to be a priest. And so finally he becomes a priest, and they decide that they would like to try a mission to Ireland. I think, oh great, this is what Patrick is made for, right? He's gonna go to Ireland, and everybody's gonna live happily ever after. No. The last thing Patrick wants to do is go to Ireland. Like, everyone's like, oh, he's the Irish of Irish. No, Patrick hated Ireland. He was a slave in Ireland. He did not want to go to Ireland. And so when there's this missionary call by the Pope to send someone to Ireland, they send somebody else because Patrick doesn't want to go. They send another bishop, but the problem is this first bishop of Ireland, he only lasts a year. They run him out of town, and in a year he makes like 3 converts. That's it. And so they come back to Patrick, and they're like, Patrick, I think it's time for you to go back to Ireland. And eventually Patrick receives another kind of vision where he does hear voices calling him back to Ireland, but he does not want to go. And this is something that I think really helps me in the kind of book I was reading about St. Patrick, this kind of fictitious one. It puts in Patrick's kind of mind what he might have been saying, and to some extent we can get from his writings, but he admits, like, my desire is not there. I do not desire to go to Ireland. I was a slave there. Now I'm a free person. I mean, what if they don't accept me? They didn't accept this other guy. But he says, I had to put aside my desire to follow the will of God. And if God was calling me, then it doesn't really matter what my desire is. I should follow and pray that God will help my desire to catch up to what his plan is. But even if he doesn't, even if God does not give me the desire to be with the Irish, so what? If I know I've heard God's voice and I'm supposed to go, then I'll go. And so he decides to go. And eventually he does get back to Ireland. And here's another kind of fascinating thing about how we can sort of look back and see what this was all about. I mentioned, in slavery, well, two things happen. Multiple, but two important ones. One, Patrick has this great religious conversion. He left Britain, couldn't care less about the faith. Now he emerges a man of prayer. Second thing that happens, because he was enslaved, he learns the Irish language. He can speak as well as the natives. He spent 6 years, and he decided he would learn, and he did. So one of the reasons that first bishop failed, Bishop Palladius, he spoke Latin, didn't speak Gaelic. So Patrick shows up, and he speaks the language of the people. More than that, he knows poverty. He's been a slave. So he's not putting on any airs. He's not arrogant. He's humble. He speaks the language, and he comes and he tells people about Jesus. Jesus who saved him from slavery and wants to save these people who are worshiping trees and rocks and things, and he wants to teach them about the true God. Patrick had, I guess, been given, you could say, a gift from what he learned, at least through his slavery. Now, we can see how God, we say he writes straight with crooked lines. I think a lot of times we can look back, on our life and say, wow, okay, I wouldn't choose maybe to go through it again exactly that way, but, if this hadn't happened, then that hadn't happened, and if this didn't happen, then that wouldn't have happened. Patrick is certainly able, at his end of his life, when he's writing his confession, to do that, to be able to see how, all right, if these things hadn't happened, then all these other great things wouldn't have happened. And the fact that Patrick was a slave made him the perfect shepherd to go back to the Irish people and spread the faith, which he does. Now, there's sometimes a kind of thinking in America these days that we know of our native people, and we have like the Franciscans and Junipero Serra who helped bring the faith, and even the voyages of Columbus. Why does he come to America in the first place? There's kind of this whole cancel culture thing today where it's like, oh, native culture is just perfect the way it is, and Christians come and they mess it all up. That's a very, very new way to look at this, and it's just an insult to the missionaries. Just like the missionaries that came to America to bring the faith, Patrick wanted to risk his life, really, to risk his freedom, to go back to Ireland to bring the true faith. He wasn't going there to be like a friend of the Druids. He was going there to bring Jesus, and he's very clear about this. Patrick, of all the missionaries, is known for like not imposing the faith on the people, but fitting in with them. But you read what he wrote, and he is very clear. I came to bring the true faith to these people who were in danger of not being saved. This is the great missionary spirit, to say, if these people are not baptized, they will not go to heaven. If these people don't know about Jesus, their life is worse off. Therefore, Patrick is able to say, I love enough these people that, and think about what it is for Patrick to say he loves the people of Ireland. These are the people who enslaved him. They stole him away for 6 years. And yet he's able to come around to say, but in my Christian faith, I love them enough to go back and bring them the faith of Jesus. That's real love right there. Willing to sacrifice yourself, your freedom, even your life, to go to people who hated you, who you don't like very much, to bring them the faith. That's pretty amazing, but that's what Christian charity does. That's why the missionaries are just some of the most incredible people. I mean, Patrick could have hung out in Rome. Could have just stayed in Rome. Said, I'm a Roman citizen. I got it nice. I'm just going to hang out here. Instead, he goes back to Ireland, which was still a wild kind of place. And as a result of it, re-Christianizes, brings the Christian faith to the entire island of Ireland, which then, of course, in retrospect, brings that faith. We think about the United States, but so many times when you're studying like theology in seminary, you read about how a lot of the way the faith got to Europe, mainland Europe, was the Irish missionaries, because it's not just that Patrick was a missionary; he inspired other people then to go from Ireland back to Europe, and he founded monasteries. So people that would spend full time living in the monasteries praying. Ireland is sometimes known as the land of saints and scholars. Think of St. Patrick and St. Bridget, but these monasteries that Patrick created, this was a place. This was like the universities of the day. You went and you studied and you learned, and so you got smart if you were a monk, and a little bit different monastic time. But this is a whole system that Patrick set up that Christianized not just Ireland, but in some ways all of Europe. To this day, when you study about confession, the whole idea that, like, I just finished hearing confessions, the idea that you go privately, face to face or behind a screen with the priest and make your confession privately and then get absolution. You learn about this in seminary. Say, well, the Irish monks brought that. Irish monks. Yeah, Irish monks going all over Europe bringing this tradition. So imagine if Patrick had said no. Imagine if Patrick were just too scared to do what he needed to do and didn't want to do it. We'd all be worse off. Just one person saying yes. All right, so that's how the faith comes. One little story about Patrick. The problem is with stories about Patrick, there's his firsthand writing, his confession, and then there's any number of stories that are myth, legend, whatever you want to call it. It's hard to know what's true. But one of my favorite, from the liturgy nerd standpoint, is about St. Patrick and the Easter fire. Now, when I was in my first parish 13 years ago, Most Pure to Mary in Topeka, they would the school kids would do a play each year, St. Patrick and the Easter fire, around Easter time. And so one of the things that the Druids and people were doing, that they worshiped the sun, they worshiped light, they worshiped fire, and so there was a custom that only the king could light the first fire or whatever. Well, St. Patrick was ready to celebrate Easter with the Easter fire, and so he just goes out and does it. Says, no, I'm going to tell you about the real source of light. God is not a fire, but we're going to light a fire to celebrate the resurrection of the true God. And he does. And so it's a little bit like St. Boniface in Germany chopping down the Christmas tree because they were worshiping the tree. Yeah. So Patrick kind of does the same thing. He supposedly creates what we know today as the Celtic cross. That cross with looks like a circle behind it. That circles the sun. They worship the sun. So he shows no, that the cross, Christ is the true sun. So that's where we get that cross with the sun behind it, the Celtic cross, as we would call it today. All right, so that's a little bit about Patrick. Now, I said, well, how about a little bit about Ireland, too? Because what happens is Ireland becomes, Catholic at that point, and it spreads everywhere. And eventually the whole island becomes Catholic. And, of course, Rome eventually, they're in communion. The Pope Celestine sent Patrick to Ireland. So there is a tide because Patrick is ordained a bishop. But Ireland was always, as I said, a little bit independent. Solid teeth. They got the true faith. Just read Patrick's confession. It's straight down the Apostles' Creed. They believe the true faith. But as far as church governance, Patrick ordained a bunch of bishops. He established a church in Ireland. And it was kind of like, hey, leave us alone. We're pretty good on our little island here. Let us alone. Well, Eventually, those ties with Rome, as they start to see that Ireland is becoming a pretty Christian place, they strengthen, and the church becomes a major player. Other players in the history of Ireland, though, the Vikings. How many people know about the? We think about the Vikings. They're like, what are they doing? Don't they come to like Leif Erikson, North America, Eric the Red, things like that? So the Vikings have the distinction of being the ones that founded the city of Dublin. How about that? Yeah, Dublin was first settled by the Vikings, who come, and at first the Vikings come kind of just to make little landing parties, take wealth, go back to like Norway or something. But eventually they come and they feel like, well, we kind of like it, and so the Vikings stay. But as will happen throughout history, they don't just stay Vikings. They kind of intermarry and become part of the Irish, and so you get this Norse Irish kind of mix thing going on, and so there's kind of a happy little marriage there between the Vikings and the native Irish. Later, the Normans will also come. Ironically, they get invited by the Irish to help fight a battle, and they like it and they stay. And so then the Irish start to kind of intermarry with the Normans, and they become Irish. So there's a lot of kind of mixing of cultures in the Irish. But of course, finally, the English, and it's all confusing how the Normans, when did the Normans become English? Go study that in history. That's a tough question. But at any rate, eventually the English, are asserting more and more their dominance over Ireland. Because Ireland, with this loose kind of confederation of kings and stuff, most of the time they're not ever really able to be united enough to defend themselves. It's kind of sad. If they all got together, Ireland could have like stayed independent Ireland, but one king keeps fighting against another. Kings will go over to England and say, hey, can you come help me beat up my other Irish king friend? And so they are fundamentally kind of vulnerable. And so we look today and say like, well, what are the English doing in Ireland? Well, the English have been in Ireland for a long time, because they kept going over and wanting to control it. And the famous, we have the Norman invasion of England in 1066, the Battle of Hastings and everything. That's when the Normans come in and they make their way over to Ireland. And so eventually it all kind of comes together, and Ireland is not exactly independent Ireland for the last 1,000 years, So it's good to kind of keep that in mind. That's something that I learned about Irish history, because as a modern person, I'm like, there's this island, right? It's Ireland. What is Britain doing? Because we'll talk about Northern Ireland in a sec. Why is Britain in Ireland? That doesn't make sense. At any rate, there's always kind of been a back and forth sort of fighting between the two. Well, eventually, the real problem comes not so much that the English would come over, but they're Christian. And so the one constant in all this was church. It doesn't matter. All right, is an Irish high king ahead of our island, or is there a British king, ahead of our? Who cares? In the end, it's all politics. It's local. And so long as my little local king is doing all right, one thing that stays constant is the church. They're Catholic. Well, all this, of course, blows up in the 16th century with the Protestant Reformation. All of a sudden, Henry VIII becomes king in England, and this creates big trouble. Because now it's not only, there's a new king in England, and by the way, he wants to be king of Ireland as well, but now Henry VIII is going to go change everybody's religion. Okay, well, that kind of works in England, maybe, where they're all, bent more on political alliances and things, but in Ireland, it's like, okay, no. What do you mean we ain't Catholic anymore? No, afraid not. We've been Catholic since Patrick, so thanks, but no thanks. Well, that obviously didn't go over very well with Henry VIII, so there's a bunch of fighting, and of course, England has the bigger armies, and so, long story short, poor Ireland gets subjugated by England, and the King of England becomes the King of Ireland as well. And eventually, the best Ireland could do is say, like, well, fine, just try to leave us alone. Um, Unfortunately, this did not work because England refused just to leave them alone. They kept wanting to go over and assert their authority, and it was never very peaceful for Ireland. And the problem is you got these mix of people now. So you've got the native Irish who are wild and crazy like from the beginning. Then you've got the English that came over supposedly to, have an English presence in Ireland, but the problem is like the Vikings, like the Normans, the English liked it. So they intermarry with the Irish, and not too long, like these supposed English are kind of becoming Irish. So they actually make laws to say that, all right, you English people that went over there, you can't look too Irish. You can't dress like Irish. You can't even ride a horse like Irish people. You can't speak Irish. You got to speak English, because everyone that goes over to Ireland, they like it. They become Irish, and heaven forbid, after the Reformation, they might become Catholic. And can't have that. So we start to see after the Protestant Reformation that it's not only that it's English versus Irish, now it becomes Protestant versus Catholic. And of course that sounds familiar because we kind of see a little bit of that today, although things are getting more peaceful. But yeah, this was all of a sudden not about England versus Ireland. It was about Protestant versus Catholic. And you read the stuff from this time, the laws that were passed against the Catholics. In England, a lot of people frankly acquiesced, save, like Bishop John Fisher and St. Thomas More, who died as martyrs. People in England are like, hey, we're political, whatever, we'll just, fine, we'll go along with it. Henry VIII is head of the church, whatever, fine. He won't be here forever. Why get all bent out of shape? That didn't go over so well in Ireland. They're like, are you kidding me? No, we've been Catholic since forever. So no. And so they just kept fighting and fighting and fighting. So England kept passing more laws saying it's not legal to be Catholic, and imposing all these measures. Eventually, Catholics couldn't own land. Catholics couldn't have offices. Catholics basically weren't free to do a whole lot of anything because they were stubbornly holding on to their Catholic faith. Well, eventually there are several, I guess, uprisings. Eventually, this kind of comes to a head at a famous battle. If you're going to want to know one battle, it took place July 1st, 1690. And this is the Battle of the Boyne. Boyne is a river, Boyne. And this is where William of Orange, so he's a Protestant, comes and attacks James, who's Catholic, forces to overthrow. William of Orange then basically oppresses all the Catholics, outlaws Catholic. It's no longer allowed to be Catholic. The Battle of the Boyne is a huge turning point. So much so that to this day, here's where the orange comes in. Okay, we'll finish up here with a little bit of the modern politics, if you will. But green is the color of the Republic of Ireland. We think of green with St. Patrick and Ireland and everything. Well, it is the Emerald Isle. It's very green and very lush. There's some kind of thought that Patrick himself preferred blue. I don't know. But nonetheless, politically in history, green came to be associated with Ireland. And then ever since the Battle of the Boyne in 1690, with William of Orange invading and oppressing the Catholics, orange then became the symbol of the occupying Protestant forces of Great Britain. So, if you want to know why you don't wear orange at an Irish fest, well, it's because largely the maintainers of Irish culture, well, these are the Irish Catholics, the Irish of the Irish Republic, the Republic of Ireland. The people that would see themselves as the authentic Irish, if you will. Because William of Orange, what did they do? Well, since it hadn't worked to like just kind of allow English people to go over because they all intermarried and became Irish, well, they create settlements of English in Ireland, especially what today we would know as Northern Ireland. So they create plantations, as they're called, to put English in Ireland. So as you can imagine, they're seen as foreigners. They're an occupying force ever since the Battle of the Boyne, and Ireland was not free. They're like, we are occupied by the invading Protestants from England. We want to be Catholic, and we want to be an independent Ireland. So, want to know how far this goes back? Well, at least to 1690. But again, that whole kind of independence of Ireland from England sort of thing, that went back even before it became a religious war. But at least since the Battle of the Boyne in 1690, with William of Orange invading Ireland and occupying it, that's really, where did the Protestant Catholic kind of fighting come in Ireland? Well, there you go. So what happens is that William of Orange, and after them, they establish these plantation settlements. They plant English in Ireland. Well, this obviously does not go over well with the native Irish, and they consistently try to oust the occupying force, but are never militarily powerful enough to do it. Well, fast forward a lot. So, late 1800s, or I guess about 18. Actually, I think it's 1800 when the Kingdom of Great Britain becomes the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. So, this is one of those weird modern things. When you talk about Great Britain or the United Kingdom, say, is the United Kingdom a country? Right, yeah, the United Kingdom's a country. Right. Well, how many countries are in this country? 4. England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland now. But it was England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales were 4 countries within the United Kingdom. Well, as you can imagine, Ireland eventually is like, we don't want to be part of this. We want our independence. And this should ring true with us in America. Independence from England? Sure. Ireland wants their independence. So we have then the Irish War of Independence that is fought at the beginning of the 20th century. And it all starts with the book that I held up here. Da-da-da. The Irish Rising of 1916. You might often hear of this as the Easter Uprising, because it took place the week after Easter in 1916. Some of the Irish decided it was time. We want an independent republic of Ireland, separate from Britain, and so there's an uprising. It only lasts about a week, and the small little Irish group is incredibly outnumbered by the British forces, and they lose, and most of the leaders are executed. But it leads then to a greater war of independence that, long story short, in 1921, so from about 1919, I think, to 1921 is the Irish War of Independence, and the Republic of Ireland wins this time. They defeat the British, and they win their independence. It leads to a treaty that creates the Free State of Ireland, and they will no longer be a part of the United Kingdom, properly speaking. They're like a little part of the Commonwealth. British government is weird, okay? No, my British friends, there's a little dig at you. But as a part of that, the 6 counties in the very northeast of Ireland, that's basically where they'd planted all the English Protestants. They are allowed to decide for themselves if they want to be a part of this new free state of Ireland, or if they want to be part of the United Kingdom. Well, the Catholics there are largely outnumbered, and so those 6 counties in very northeast Ireland vote to not be part of the new free state of Ireland, and they stay in the United Kingdom. This is what is today the country province, whatever the British want to call it today, of Northern Ireland. So there are 32 counties in Ireland, the whole island of Ireland. 6 of those counties are not part of the country of Ireland today. They are a part of the country of Northern Ireland, which is one of the 4 countries a part of the United Kingdom. So today we have the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Great Britain is England, Wales, and Scotland. How many countries are in this country? 4. And so there's this little chunk of Northeast Ireland that is not part of Ireland, the country. It's a part of the United Kingdom, the country of Northern Ireland. Go Google it. I mean, it's a mess. So this is where you see a lot of the kind of fighting that might go on today. Because, believe it or not, after Ireland wins their independence from Britain, the fact that these 6 counties stay with the United Kingdom, half of the people on the winning side decide, well, we don't like that. That's not good enough. And so right after the Irish War for Independence, you get the Irish Civil War, in which the winning side fights amongst themselves. Again, it kind of goes back to the entire history of Ireland. They could have done better for themselves in history if they had just all joined together and defended themselves. But as soon as Ireland wins its independence, they immediately start a civil war because we don't want Northern Ireland. We want all of Ireland to be united. And that's where you get the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, which was a good thing. And then it starts to become a terrorist kind of organization and all that kind of thing. Eventually, the Irish Civil War ends, and the Republican, the people that want the country of Ireland, even if Northern Ireland is part of Britain, they win. And that's the status quo today. So you might hear the song... a lot of times when you hear Irish music, it's somewhat political in nature. There's songs, for instance, about 4 green fields. There are 4 provinces of Ireland that go back to the time of St. Patrick. There was a 5th, but now it's gone. There are 4 provinces in Ireland, and essentially the northeast one with the 6 counties up there, that's one of those provinces. And so the song of 4 green fields, Google it. It's a great song. It talks about how, I had 4 green fields and now one of those is in bondage. Well, that's referring to Northern Ireland, the northeast province of Ireland. Essentially, most of it is occupied in the language of the person who would have written the song. You'll also hear songs like about the black and tans. Refers to the color of the uniforms during the Irish War of Independence, of kind of, some no good British soldiers who would, do all kinds of terrible things, kind of like almost similar to the SS, I guess you'd say, in Nazi Germany, that sort of thing. Like there's the sort of special soldiers that created a lot of the problems. So the black and tans are British soldiers that came over to, shake up the Irish during the Civil War, during the War for Independence. So you'll hear a lot in the Irish music about these kind of political sort of struggles. And I here in Kansas City, we have, I believe, the largest St. Patrick's Day parade outside of Ireland, or maybe maybe the New York one is bigger, and then Kansas City is the biggest. So we know our Irish history here. One of my favorite events in the fall is the Irish Fest, a great weekend of Celtic Irish music. COVID canceled these things, so I'm really kind of upset about that. But think about all of our kind of Irish heritage. I've tried to encapsulate a bit of St. Patrick, but also a little bit of Ireland. So we're coming to our end here. I don't know if anyone has specific questions. Don is asking, where was St. Patrick from? He's from Britain. We don't know exactly where he was born, but somewhere on what that... So if you look, there's 2 isles up there. There's the island of Ireland, and there's Ireland that is England, Wales, and Scotland. He was born in, probably Wales. So the Welsh like to claim Patrick as one of their own. So he was probably Welsh. He was a Roman citizen. His parents came with the legion that pressed up into Britain. We know he's a Roman citizen, and he was kidnapped and taken to Ireland, and then years later went back. So he is definitely not Irish by birth. But I guess you could say by death he is, because by the end of his life, he said he's given his whole life out of love for his Irish people. And obviously he's buried in Ireland. We don't know for sure his grave. We think we know where it's at, but people kept stealing dirt, so they put a big rock over top of it. So it's a little bit north of Dublin. And you can go see it in the Diocese of Armagh up there, which is where Bishop Patrick created the center of his governance of the church in Ireland. Okay, hope that answers that question. Let me see over here on the St. Patrick side. Bob Dorse likes the history. Diane Linder is on. Mark Gilstrap wants to know how often you can receive communion one day. You can receive communion twice in one day, Mark, provided that the second one is at Mass and not a communion service. Quick answer to a question there. See, I aim to please. Any final questions about Patrick? And there is some debate that Patrick was not his original name, that the Pope renamed him Patricius, that he would have had a more Celtic sounding name before that. So I might end then with this. I mentioned the whole bit about the green and the orange and everything. The original flag of the Republic of Ireland, it was all green. Well, I guess it is. It's all green with a golden harp on it. The tricolor flag that a lot of us are familiar with today, you might note, is green and white and orange. You're like, I thought orange was bad. What's orange doing on the Irish flag? Well, a lot of staunch Irish people reject that flag just for that reason. But the idea was that, after everything had quieted down with independence and we moved forward, it's meant to show that, at least theoretically, that the green, represents the Irish Catholics, and the orange represents the Protestants brought by William of Orange, and the white in the middle is supposed to represent peace between those two factions, as it were. So it's kind of a symbol and a hope that there need not be fighting between the Protestants and the Catholics. And of course, as with all religious wars, it's not just a religious war, it's also a political war. There's not war today, but it's kind of like, the animosity is way down. I mean, but think how the Irish War for Independence is barely it's just over a century past, so it's not that long ago in history. So there's still tensions to be worked out, and we certainly pray for that. But most of all today, Catholic Protestant debates aside, we gotta, just from the Catholic standpoint, stop worrying about the Protestants. Catholics got enough problem in Ireland, getting our own house in order. Ireland used to be lands of saints and scholars. It used to be Catholic was the identity that sustained Ireland through everything. Catholics in Ireland just legalized abortion a couple years ago. We're in big trouble. I mean, this is crazy. Ireland is, people don't go to church. Faith is basically dying out in Ireland. Ireland has been Catholic through thick and thin through millennia, and the faith is in danger of being wiped out. Ireland was so Catholic that they are the ones that sent missionaries all over the place. How many people know an O'Brien or a Father O'Connor in the United States? Because Catholic Church was settled largely by Irish in America. Now there's going to be no Catholics in Ireland. And the ones that are there are the kind of Catholics that say, well, we're going to legalize abortion. Wow, we're in trouble. The whole world's in trouble. But if Catholic Ireland is in trouble, if Catholic Ireland is not going to be Catholic anymore, Catholic France, long since being the eldest daughter of the church, we are losing the faith in major traditional homes of Catholicism. So we got to pray for Ireland on this day of St. Patrick. He would not be happy with what's happening to his faith, his beloved Catholicism in Ireland. He gave his life to spread there. The snakes are coming back. We'll end with that little story. There's the story that Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland. Well, the truth is that there probably aren't any snakes in Ireland. That it's an island and there were never snakes on it. The snakes refer to heresies, paganism, he drove out false worship and brought in worship of the true God. You know, one of the things that the pagans were doing, they were sacrificing their children. They were sacrificing their firstborn to the sun or to some nature god. Patrick put an end to that. Now we're sacrificing our children to nothing, just the god of convenience. So we pray that there can be a rebirth of Catholicism in Catholic Ireland, and that as the faith came out of Ireland and brought to the United States, that through the intercession of St. Patrick, so many people who claim the title Catholic in the United States that came through Irish missionaries, that we ourselves would be missionaries. Patrick didn't want to go to Ireland, but he was sent by God, and so he went, and he brought it. He went toe-to-toe with the Druid priest. He brought Catholicism to a place that it was not easy to bring it. Well, we've got that same battle today. It is not easy to be Catholic today anywhere, but even in America, it's not easy. We pray that St. Patrick would give us the courage to do as he did one Easter and light the fire of the true God in defiance of all the false gods, and that as he converted all of Ireland and got the snakes out, St. Patrick can drive the snakes out of our life, the sin out of our life, and then he can drive the snakes out of Ireland again today and out of the United States as well. I'm proud of my Irish heritage. It's been great to share a little bit of that with you tonight. I hope you've enjoyed a little taste of St. Patrick and a little history of Ireland. I do not claim to be a great knowledgeable person about especially some of the political modern history of Ireland. That was a little taste, and you know, imagine if someone from Ireland tried to describe the American Civil War. Would miss some nuance. So I apologize to those who are more knowledgeable than I know. I covered very quickly something that is very complex, especially the modern political situation. So we just pray today that the Catholic faith can unite us all as it is done for Ireland through millennia, that belief in the one true God, as Patrick famously proclaimed, he gave his life, he says, in witness to the truth of the Trinity, famously taking, at least in legend, a shamrock, a little clover, and saying, look, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God. Patrick started simple and small. Why don't you do that too? Go spread the faith. And may the intercession of the great missionary St. Patrick go with you. And may God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. St. Patrick, pray for us. Good night.